Hello and welcome to Twisted Iron Projects. In today's video we will be working on a 14th century style candlestick holder. Now if you notice the timer at the bottom right hand corner here is being timed because this is a challenge that is put forth by a gentleman named Daniel Moss. He is a fellow blacksmith and YouTuber, and I highly recommend that if you haven't seen his stuff yet, go check out his channel, go check out his videos. But he put forth this challenge to make this candlestick holder in 20 minutes or so roughly, and I figured we'd go ahead and give it a shot. Now this project did end up taking me about 43 minutes or so, and so I am going to have this at 2 times the speed, but it is going to be recorded the entire length of the process. There will be no edits, no cuts in the video as per the challenge, so sit back and enjoy. Now if you've been with the channel for a little while now, you know that something's kind of weird because it was known as Hawaiian Shirt Projects. I've decided to go ahead and change the name up a little bit and change it over to Twisted Iron Projects, so I hope you guys enjoy. As well as I also changed up my logo. A good friend of mine, he decided to give me a hand with it, and we worked together, and this is what we came up with. So let me know what you think of the new name and the logo down in the comments below. I'd really appreciate it. Now for this challenge, you are to start out with a piece of stock metal that is cold. It can't be preheated or anything like that, and go into the fire and start working from there. And that's how, and throughout the entire process it needs to come out to as close as you can get it to 20 minutes. Now I am still pretty new to blacksmithing, and so it did take me a lot longer, hence the reason why I've sped it up to 2 times the speed. But the process that I'm going through is I decided to make a little bit of a tool, kind of a guillotine tool almost, to do the starting process, and this is really going to define and set my measurements and my offsets for specific locations and parts of this build. Just makes it a little bit easier, especially with me not having the hammer control. And so it's really simple, just a piece of rebar that I bent around and put a little bit of a shank onto it, and once the metal's hot, I stick it in there to the size that I need it to be, and I strike down, and on both sides it creates this indent. And it worked pretty well actually, surprising for how crude of a tool that this is that I made. But this kind of just goes to show you guys that if you don't have the tool or the skills to be able to do something quite at this point, to make it as nice as the pros do, you can always make a tool that will help you. That's kind of the big thing about being a blacksmith, is that you have the means and the drive basically to learn how to make your own tools to help you with your work. But now that I got that offset complete, I'm going to go ahead and heat up the other end of it, and I'm going to start drawing it out. And the dimensions need to be about 8 millimeters square on the shank side of this. And so I'm going to have it held upright as hot as I can get it without burning it or reaching critical, and say this will help it compress into each other. And then I'm going to kind of work it back and forth on the edge, and I'm going to lay it back over flat to kind of keep everything from rolling over, then go back to the edge and just kind of shrink that material down and stretch it out lengthwise at the same time to be able to be the dimensions that I need it to be. Now if you notice that I have white lines on my anvil here. Now these are preset measurements that I put onto my anvil for this project. That way I can kind of get, without running over to a ruler or anything like that, I can just hold it up to a certain edge of my anvil and that line to make sure I got the correct dimensions that I'm looking for. And so it's a little bit of a way to help me speed up my process, just having my dimensions right there on my anvil. The only issue that I had with this method was that I was in such a hurry that I kept forgetting which marks I had were for which measurements. And so that slowed me down a little bit, but that was just me being in a rush, not thinking things all the way through, and honestly not practicing a lot. Now I did do this, attempt this, not based on a time limit, but just trying to make the candlestick holder itself about 6 times. And the first 3 times failed completely. Either my forge weld didn't hold, I broke the piece, or it just came out looking completely awful and none of the dimensions were even close to what they needed to be. And so there's another bit for you guys, just keep on working at it. The more you practice, the better you'll get, the more consistent you'll become, and just keep on working at it. And so that's what I had to do. It took me about 6 tries before I was comfortable enough to try and actually go for a time, And this is what we ended up with. It came out to a little over 43 minutes in total. But just keep working at it. You'll get there eventually. Now that I got the shank drawn out, I'm able to grab onto it with some better tongs. That was really big help in this bit of the project, because my flat jaw tongs don't really grip very well. So having these V-bit tongs really did help me keep a hold of the material and keep things where I wanted it. Gave me that little bit of extra control over the material while I'm working, and that came in extremely handy. Again, it's another tool, but tongs are simple enough to where if you just watch a couple videos, do a little bit of practice, you'll be able to make them, and you'll be able to make all the tongs that you need, honestly. And so you'll never have to buy another store pair again unless you absolutely want to. But what I'm doing here is I am bringing it to the edge of my anvil. That way that offset is hanging over the edge, and I can kind of keep that piece defined and separate while I finish drawing out the shank side and trying to bring that down into a round taper. I believe the dimensions were for 60 to 70 millimeters. And so I'm going to keep working on that taper, trying to round it out before I go into the rest of the process of actually making the candlestick cup. And here's another little shout out to another fellow blacksmith and YouTuber. This gentleman actually has been a huge inspiration into me even wanting to get into blacksmithing to begin with. His channel is Black Bear Forge. He has done this challenge as well, and I highly recommend that you go and check him out and see his videos. Very knowledgeable, great content. And I will try to leave a link to both channels, Black Bear Forge and Daniel Moss, down there in the description, so make sure you check them out. So now that I got that section defined, I'm going to start working on the cup by using the crosspeen side of my hammer to draw out that sectioned off area. I don't want it to go all four directions while I'm hammering. That's why I'm not using the rounding side. I'm using the crossbeam side to kind of pull it lengthwise and draw it out in a specific direction. That way it's not becoming a circle. Instead, I'm trying to keep that rectangular shape. That way later on, I could wrap it around, bend it into a circle to hold on to the candlestick. Now that I'm going back through the footage of me doing this project, I am noticing some flaws that I had and realizing where I need to correct myself later on. I've had a lot of misstrikes with my hammer blows, and I can see now part of that is because when I'm hammering, I'm not bringing my hammer straight up and straight down. I'm just kind of swinging at it a little bit too wildly. So I need to focus on and practice myself on bringing my hammer straight up and straight down with each blow of the hammer. So in order to get the cup to actually bend the way that I want it to, I'll be using my hot cut tool here as just kind of a brace for me to be able to start the initial bend. I'm going to be using my small ball peen hammer for this and just kind of strike it in the middle to get it to start the bend, and then keep rotating it side to side to where I'm not hitting the same spot over and over again, creating a crease. This will help it keep a round, even consistency. Once I get it fairly tight, close together, about the shape that I want, I'm going to throw it back in the fire. And this here, another tool that I made, very crude, just a piece of 20 millimeter round stock that I forged a point into to be able to use to actually form the cup a lot better and to keep it a nice, tight, the actual dimension that I need it to be. And see, I'm usually using it alongside with my hot cut tool here to try and make sure everything is even and uniform. So again, if you don't have the skills to do it all by hand, by eye, like some of the pros do, use tools, use what you have at your disposal, try to find new creative ways to get your desired effect with your material to make your piece. Now we go into another tool that I made, kind of the same thing as my rebar guillotine tool that I did. This just has a lot wider, more pronounced profile to it. I actually designed this to help me draw out large pieces of metal, but it turned out to work perfectly in this case to help me draw out that next section that I was talking about earlier, just below the cup, and not damage the cup. I was able to keep it braced up against there like that, and it had just enough space to clear the cup and draw out the material into that 60-70 millimeter that I need it to be. Then I just kind of cleaned up all those rough spots that it kind of made, those little indents that elongated it. And then I'm going to knock off the corners here in just a second, because it is still square, it's just being drawn out a little bit into a point. So I'm going to have to, in order to turn it into a round, I'm going to have to knock off the corners, turn it into an octagon. Then I could rotate it around while hammering and create a piece of round bar, or as close to it as I can physically get myself. Now notice I keep trying to keep that cup over the edge of the anvil. I don't want to squish it. I've spent so much time and effort into trying to make it nice, even, uniform, the correct size. So I'm going to just hang it over the edge of that anvil and try to focus, that's why I'm using my smaller hammer, on just the section that I need to hammer. Again, I need to work on my hammer accuracy, and it's just something I need to practice on. Unfortunately, this is the point where I started to notice that the shank of it was starting to twist on me. Now, I have seen other YouTubers, such as Daniel Moss, fix this situation by hammering on the flat ends of the material again, and it'll work its way to being flat to where the actual positioning of the rectangle or the square stock itself. But being in the time crunch, I wasn't really focused on that. I figured, you know what, once I get hot again, after I get done drawing everything out to the size I need it to be, I could bend it back in shape in my vise. But again, it all comes with practice. It's a little bit more practice. I probably could have done it within a better time limit of doing it the correct way and getting it to straighten out through here at the anvil, and saved a lot of time from me walking over to my vise, which actually is in a poor location and I need to move because it's on the other side of my shop. But now we are at the point of me trying to taper out and draw down to a point the opposite end of the shank from the cup. And this is actually going to be the prong section that ends up being folded and sits next to the cup itself. So I'm going to continue refining the size and the shape of the shank, and then drawing that into a point just by slightly angling my hammer, angling the material on my anvil, and then striking. And while you're doing this, you want to continuously flip it the 90 degrees. You don't want to hammer on one side and flatten out the stock. You want to try to keep it square. So strike once or twice on one side, flip it 90, strike it once or twice again. And that'll help draw it out as well as keep everything nice and square. So here I am again, just double checking my measurements on the side of my anvil. The closer I could keep everything to dimension right here in this process, or the earlier on in the process, the more likely and better chance I have of having the completed project be correct and to dimension. So I'm going to bring my hot cut back out. I'm going to try to get my dimensions that I want done. Unfortunately, it's starting to cool down too quickly, so I'm going to throw it back in the fire. Once it's a little bit hotter, I'm going to bring it back over to the hot cut, try to get my dimension. I believe it is 90 millimeter for this one, and then do a slight cut. I'm not trying to cut all the way through, just slightly, to be able to allow me to move the metal easier when I go to fold this over onto itself. Now you can do this without doing a cut. I just found that in my personal experience during my test runs, and I was able to move the metal easier in the direction I want to and try to keep that dimension and keep it nice and tight together with that cut in there. Now that we got that section nice and hot again, I'm going to bring it over to the edge of the anvil, and I am going to bend it down away from that cut and towards the open side of my cup. And again, I'm going to try to keep that as tight and close to that mark as I possibly can. Unfortunately, right here is also where I realized that I made that cut just a little too far down on that shank. My measurement was off, and it's not going to have the point in the exact location that I need it to be for the final project. But we're in it. Let's go ahead and continue and finish the project and keep practicing and honing our skills on making this. That way at a later time I can make it either faster as well as possibly better and more accurate to the actual needed finished product. Now we are coming up on the forge welding part, and one of the things in this challenge is not to use flux for your forge weld. And this is going to be the first time I forge welded without flux, aside from during my practice pieces. I've only ever done 2 other projects that had forge welding, so this was a bit tricky, and where I usually ended up messing up in my practice pieces before doing this one. Thankfully, this time it went smooth and without a hitch, so I got it up to almost critical temperature, give it a quick directly to the anvil, and instantly, as soon as it touched that anvil, I gave it a quick couple smacks, and then back into the fire it went to get it back up to forging heat again. I don't want it to get too cold during this process and then shear itself apart due to the force of me hammering. And so I found it was easiest if I keep my tongs on the material, hammer in my hand while I'm cranking the heat on it. That way it's instant over smack. As soon as it touches that anvil, I want to smack my hammer. Now you're not wanting to give it a full-on roaring hammer blow, and say you want to give it a nice solid bit of force to it, but it doesn't need to be overpowered, but you also don't want to go too light on it to where it's not doing anything. Forge welding is definitely very difficult and something that I need to continue practicing on, and this project really showed me where I was going wrong on a lot of things. And thankfully I'm starting to get the hang of it, and because forge welding is a very critical piece of blacksmithing, and it's crucial to most of your projects you could do as a blacksmith. So I'm very happy for this challenge, for getting me out there and doing more and practicing a lot of these essential skills of tapering, bending, forge welding in particular. And so thank you very much, Daniel Moss, for issuing out this challenge. I'm happy to be a part of it and to learn something. Now, you see me disappear off to the background there. I'm actually heading over to my vise to straighten out that section that I told you guys about earlier, with the cup starting to twist a little bit right there in the neck of that shaft compared to the actual square piece of the shank. And so I just wanted to straighten that up before I get any further into this project. And now we're back in the heat to go into the next step of the process. So here we are. Now that that's straightened out, I'm going to draw this back out and try to put that taper back on there, trying to get it to the finished final dimensions of what this project needs. And so again, that taper at the very end is going to be between 60 and 70 millimeters, and I'm just focusing on trying to get the overall total length correct as well. Again, as I'm tapering it, I'm going to work it back and forth, doing that 90-degree flip after every couple of strikes, every other strike. And then once I get towards the end there, I go to every strike. I flip it at 90 degrees. You see it's twisting again, so I'm going to have to go back in and hit the flat side to get that straightened back out, like so. And if it doesn't come out quite right, again, we're going to be going to the anvil here in a little bit, or not the anvil, to the vise again, and I could finish straightening everything out there as well. Unfortunately, I don't have a camera over there. I wasn't going to waste the time, since this was a timed project, to take my camera with me to my vise. So you guys will have to wait until my next video where I put this into a little bit more detail for you guys in a montage and everything. A little bit less talking, just kind of put everything together, shorter, better edited, and more precise information video wise that we can see exactly what's happening. At this point in the video, I'd like to thank all of you guys for watching my videos, sticking with the channel. I really appreciate it. You're awesome. Also, a little note, anybody could do this challenge. You don't have to be directly challenged or anything like that. If you got to forge some basic tools, get out there, grab some material, and practice this. Do a couple of practice runs, and then record the entire thing all the way through. Check out Daniel Moss's video as to more details and how to submit your challenge, and just give it a shot. You never know until you try, and you only get better through practice. And so I'm challenging those of you with a forge to get out there and make this candlestick. So now that we got that part finished, we got the entire shaft nice and hot, run it over to my vise, and I'm going to put the bend up there by the cup neck side that I need to get the point and the cup separated from each other. Now the tip of the point was supposed to be 10 millimeters taller than the cup. I didn't quite meet that measurement when I did my bend before my forge weld, but this is as close as I could get it, and they're almost even with each other, and the bend actually came out quite nicely just using a pair of tongs as well as some regular channel lock pliers. And again, basic tools go a long way in this until you're able to make your own tools that are better. And there you have it, a finished 14th century candlestick holder in 43 minutes and 16 seconds. Thank you again, Daniel Moss. I appreciate the challenge. I learned a lot from it. Here's a couple examples of my failed attempts for those of you that are watching. Again, keep an eye out for some more videos. Until next time, stay classy, party on.